The silence in the office was the first thing she'd had to learn. It wasn't an absence of sound. It was a presence, a weight in the air as heavy and deliberate as the slabs of black marble that made up the floor. Imani adjusted the collar of her silk blouse, the fabric cool against her skin, and focused on the tablet in her hands. The schedule for Kaido Tanaka was a complex, interlocking puzzle of logistics, threats, and finance, all written in a code she was beginning to decipher. 3 meetings today. 2 shipments to track. 1 report on a subordinate whose loyalty was now a flickering candle in a hurricane. Her predecessor had lasted less than 6 hours. Imani had seen the footage from the lobby camera. A young woman with a terrified face, sprinting for the elevator as if the hounds of hell were at her heels. In a way, they were. The men standing guard in the reception area, dressed in immaculate Tom Ford suits with a faint outline of hardware beneath the jackets, were perfectly still, but their stillness was predatory. They hadn't tried to stop the fleeing woman. They had simply watched her go, their expressions unreadable. That, Imani had learned, was far more terrifying than any overt threat. She had been here for 3 days. A record. A soft whirring sound broke the oppressive silence. Kaido emerged from his private study, his wheelchair gliding noiselessly over the marble. He stopped beside her desk, not looking at her, his gaze fixed on the floor-to-ceiling window that offered a god's-eye view of Shinjuku. The city sprawled below them, a glittering circuit board of light and life, utterly oblivious to the silent empire ruled from this penthouse office. He was a man carved from stillness. His paralysis from the waist down seemed not to have diminished him, but to have concentrated his power into his upper body. His shoulders were broad under a bespoke charcoal suit, his hands resting on the wheels of his chair with a surgeon's calm. The intricate blue-black tail of a dragon peeked from the crisp white collar of his shirt, a hint of the ink that covered his skin. His face was sharp angles and cold planes, his black eyes holding a depth that felt ancient and exhausted. "The quarterly logistics reports," he said. His voice was low, a gravelly whisper that cut through the air. It was never raised, yet it commanded absolute attention. "On your desk," Imani replied, not looking up from her tablet. Cross-referenced with the port manifests from Yokohama. "There's a 3% discrepancy in the Hakuba shipment. I've flagged it in red." Silence. He didn't praise her for her thoroughness. He didn't acknowledge it at all. He expected competence as a baseline requirement like breathing. Anything less was a fatal flaw. He began to turn his chair toward his desk. That's when she saw it. A flicker on the secondary network monitor she'd set up on her own desk. It was a ghost, a tiny string of code scrolling in a diagnostic window she kept open out of old habit from her days in IT. It was a whisper-thin intrusion, a digital lockpick sliding into a keyhole no one was watching. The main security system, a fortress of firewalls and encryption, hadn't registered a thing. This was quieter, more elegant, more dangerous. She didn't think. She acted. Her fingers flew across her keyboard, her professional calm shattering into pure, focused instinct. She bypassed the standard protocols, diving straight into the server's root command line. She didn't have the clearance for what she was doing. In Kaido Tanaka's world, acting without orders was a sin punishable in ways she didn't want to imagine. But waiting for permission would be too late. The code was a worm, burrowing toward the core files, the ledgers, the names, the entire architecture of his organization. She found the breach point, a backdoor left open in a recent software patch. She slammed it shut, typing a kill command that severed the connection and firewalled the port. A red warning light finally flashed on the main security console, a belated alarm long after the danger had passed. The office was deathly quiet again, but the silence had changed. It was no longer weighted. It was sharp, a drawn blade. Kaido had not moved. His chair was angled away from her, but she could feel his eyes on her. She could feel the attention of the entire room, of the unseen guards, of the very city below, all converging on her. She finally lifted her head, her heart hammering against her ribs not with fear, but with the brutal, electric hum of adrenaline. He slowly wheeled his chair around to face her. His expression was unreadable, a mask of cold obsidian. "Explain," he commanded. The single word held the promise of a swift and final judgment. "There was an unauthorized access attempt," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "It bypassed the primary security layer. I terminated the connection. You acted without authorization. It was not a question." "Yes," she met his gaze. There was no point in lying or making excuses. He would see right through them. Waiting would have compromised the entire network. They were after the financial records. He studied her for a long, unbearable moment. The silence stretched until it was thin enough to snap. She saw a flicker of something in his eyes, not anger, not surprise, but a cold, calculating assessment. He was reevaluating her, recategorizing her from a temporary employee to something else, an asset, or a liability. "Ryota," Kaido said, his voice still quiet. A man materialized from the shadows, near the doorway. He was broad and severe, a scar cutting through his left eyebrow. He was Kaido's head of security, a man who moved with the deadly grace of a panther. He bowed his head slightly. "Pack a bag for her," Kaido ordered, his eyes never leaving Imani's. "She will be staying at the residence. Effective immediately." Imani's breath hitched. The residence. His private penthouse, a fortress 2 levels up. It wasn't an offer. It was a sentence. "She has seen a vulnerability in our defenses," Kaido continued, as if explaining a simple business decision. "And she has demonstrated a unique skill set. Until the source of this attack is neutralized, she is a security risk. And a resource. We do not let resources out of our sight." Ryota nodded once and looked at Imani. His expression was flat. She was no longer a person. She was a package to be moved. That was the moment everything changed. She had walked into this job for the absurdly high salary, a way to build a new life far from home. She had told herself it was just an office job, albeit for a man who dealt in death and fear. But by acting, by saving him, she had inadvertently chained herself to his world. She wasn't just an assistant anymore. She was his. And as Kaido turned his chair and glided back toward the silent sanctuary of his study, she understood with chilling certainty that he would not be letting her go. The penthouse was a cage made of glass and gold. It occupied the top 2 floors of the skyscraper, a monument to wealth and paranoia. The furniture was minimalist and severe. The art on the walls was worth more than she could earn in a dozen lifetimes, and every window was made of bulletproof glass that distorted the Tokyo skyline into a beautiful, unreachable mirage. Her room was larger than her entire apartment, with a bed draped in silk and a bathroom carved from a single piece of white marble. It was luxurious, and it was a prison. Ryota, or another of Kaido's stone-faced soldiers, was always outside her door. Her work life bled into her entire existence. She no longer commuted. She simply woke up and walked down a spiral staircase of floating steel and glass to a home office that was a mirror of the one below. Kaido was a constant, silent presence. He worked with a relentless, punishing focus, the quiet whir of his wheelchair the only sound for hours on end. In this forced proximity, she began to see the cracks in his armor. She saw the subtle, constant pain he held in the tight set of his jaw. She saw the way his hands, always so calm and steady, would sometimes grip the arms of his chair until his knuckles were white. She saw the immense, private effort it took for him to move from his chair to the low sofa in his study, a struggle he endured alone, refusing any offer of help with a glare that could freeze fire. He was a man of absolute control, trapped inside a body that had betrayed him. One night, the uneasy peace was shattered. A call came through on a secure line. Ryota answered, listened, and then approached Kaido's desk. His voice was low, but Imani could hear the tension in it. "It's about the Ishida territory. A betrayal. Kenji is dead." Kaido didn't react. He simply stared at the report on his screen, his face a mask. But Imani saw his hand move to a small, framed photograph on his desk, the only personal item in the entire, sterile space. He didn't touch it, but his fingers hovered over the silver frame for a bare second. Later, after Ryota had left and the apartment was cloaked in its usual heavy silence, she saw him looking at the photo again. It was a picture of a woman with a vibrant, joyful smile and eyes that crinkled at the corners. She was beautiful, and she was gone. Later that week, Kaido granted her a small reprieve. A supervised trip to a specialty shop in Ginza to procure a rare type of ink he used for his personal correspondence. It was a test she knew, a chance to see if she would run. Ryota drove, his eyes constantly scanning the mirrors. The city felt different from behind the tinted windows of the armored sedan. It was a foreign land she was only visiting. As they waited at a traffic light, Imani noticed it. A black sedan, 2 cars back, that had been with them since they left the building. It wasn't the make or model that caught her eye, but the driver. He was watching them, not casually. His focus was intent, predatory. Her heart began a slow, heavy beat. This was it. This was the world outside the gilded cage. Ryota had seen it too. His hand rested lightly on the gearshift, his body coiled like a spring. The temptation to run was a physical ache in her chest. She could get out at the shop. She could disappear into the crowds, melt away, find an embassy. She could go home. The light turned green. Ryota pulled away smoothly, but his gaze was fixed on the rear-view mirror. The black sedan followed. Imani thought of the fleeing assistant on the security footage. She thought of the cold, silent apartment and the man who ruled it. She thought of the photograph of the smiling woman. When they arrived at the shop, Ryota turned to her. "Wait in the car," he said, his voice a low command. "No," Imani said, her own voice surprising her with its firmness. "They're watching for a reaction. If I stay in the car, it shows we're spooked. I'll go in. You stay with the car. Be ready." Ryota stared at her, his scar seeming to deepen. For a moment, she thought he would refuse. Then he gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod. She walked into the shop, her legs feeling strangely disconnected from her body. She bought the ink, her hands moving with a steadiness she didn't feel. She could have kept walking, out the back entrance, into the labyrinthine alleys of Ginza. She had a 5-minute window. Freedom was a tangible thing, just a few steps away. Instead, she walked back out the front door, the small, elegantly wrapped package in her hand, and got back into the car. She met Ryota's eyes in the mirror. She didn't say a word. She had made her choice. She had come back. The drive back was tense, but the black sedan was gone. They had shown their hand, and she had shown hers. That night, the silence in the penthouse felt different. Kaido found her in the library, a vast, 2-story room filled with the scent of old paper and leather. She was staring out the window, at the endless sea of lights. He wheeled his chair to a stop a few feet away from her. He didn't speak for a long time. The only sound was the soft hum of the building's ventilation system. "Ryota told me what happened," he said finally. His voice was different. The usual icy edge was gone, replaced by something rougher, more raw. "He said you could have left." "I could have," she agreed, still watching the city. "Why didn't you?" She turned to face him then. The ambient light from the city below cast his face in shadows, making his features seem even more severe, more lonely. "Because running felt temporary," she said, the words coming out before she had a chance to censor them. That car would have been the first of many. This felt like the safer choice. It was a lie. A partial truth, at best. The real reason was more complicated, something she wasn't ready to admit even to herself. He moved closer, the chair gliding silently across the thick rug until he was right in front of her. He was so close she could smell the faint, clean scent of cedar and smoke that always clung to him. He tilted his head, his dark eyes searching her face, looking for the lie. "Thank you," he whispered. The words were so quiet they were almost lost in the room. He wasn't thanking her for the report or for her work. He was thanking her for not running, for choosing the cage. It was the first moment of genuine, undeniable tenderness she had ever received from him, and it was more disarming than any threat. The armor had cracked, just for a second, and what she saw underneath was something vulnerable and fiercely, dangerously human. The attack on Kaido's network was a prelude. The rival Sadogumi, emboldened by what they perceived as weakness, began to move more aggressively. They started a whisper campaign, leaking rumors through the Tokyo underworld that the great Kaido Tanaka was a shell of his former self, a crippled dragon unable to protect his territory. The pressure wasn't just external, it was internal. Imani could feel the tension coiling among Kaido's own lieutenants during their brief, formal meetings in the penthouse. Loyalty was a currency, and the perception of weakness could bankrupt an empire overnight. One evening, as dusk bled purple and orange across the sky, it happened. Imani was organizing files in the main living area, the sprawling space eerily quiet. Kaido was by the window, silhouetted against the dying light, his gaze lost in the city below. It was a rare moment of unguarded stillness. She saw it first, a flicker of movement on an opposing rooftop, then the glint of light off a lens. Her mind didn't have time to process the thought, to form the word sniper. Her body reacted on pure, primal instinct. A split second later, a tiny, perfect circle of red light appeared on the chest of Kaido's dark suit. She didn't scream. She didn't call out. She launched herself across the room, her hands slamming into the back of his wheelchair with all her strength. The heavy, customized chair shot forward, careening away from the window just as the world erupted in a deafening crack. The bullet, meant for his heart, punched through the thick glass, shattering it into 1,000 crystalline spider's webs. It buried itself in the marble column where his head had been a moment before. Glass rained down like deadly snow. Alarms blared. Ryota and his men flooded the room, weapons drawn, their movements a blur of lethal efficiency. But all Imani could see was Kaido, his back pressed against the column, his face unreadable but his eyes fixed on her. He was alive. She had saved him. In the chaotic aftermath, Kaido's men captured one of the infiltrators. They dragged him into the center of the room, a terrified man with a Sadogumi tattoo visible on his wrist. Kaido's face was arctic cold. The judgment was already passed. He gave a sharp, almost invisible nod to Ryota, whose hand went to the pistol at his hip. "Wait," Imani said, her voice cutting through the tension. Every head turned to her. Ryota's hand froze. Kaido's eyes narrowed. "A dead man can't tell you who hired him," she said, her voice gaining strength. She walked toward the captive, picking up the small burner phone that had fallen from his pocket during the struggle. Her fingers moved quickly, swiping through the call log, the messages. It was mostly coded nonsense, but one recurring number had a location tag from a small bar in Kabukicho. "He's low-level, a disposable asset, but the person who paid him isn't. He won't talk if you torture him. He'll just scream. But he might trade his life for his boss's." She had crossed a line. She was no longer a civilian assistant caught in the crossfire. She was offering tactical advice in an execution. She was thinking like one of them. The room was silent as Kaido considered her words. He looked from the phone in her hand to the terrified man on the floor, and then back to her. A long moment passed. "Do it," he said to Ryota, his voice flat. But he wasn't looking at his security chief. He was looking at Imani. The order was for Ryota, but the permission was from her. It was a horrifying, intimate transfer of power. Later, after they had the information they needed, Kaido found her alone on the balcony, the wind whipping strands of hair across her face. The shattered window had been covered with a temporary steel plate, a raw scar on the face of his perfect home. "You see things," he said, wheeling his chair to a stop beside her. "Not just what's in front of you. You see the angles. The leverage." His voice held a note of something she couldn't decipher. Awe, or perhaps fear. "No one in my world thinks that way. They see a nail, they use a hammer." She wrapped her arms around herself, the cool night air a stark contrast to the heat she felt under his gaze. "I told myself," she began, her voice barely a whisper, "that staying here was about survival. A logical choice to stay alive." She finally turned to meet his eyes, the city lights reflecting in their dark depths. "I was lying to myself. It was not a declaration of love. It was something far more honest and far more dangerous. It was an admission that she was no longer just a prisoner. Her reasons for being here had become tangled and complex, rooted in the strange, magnetic pull of the man beside her and the violent world he commanded. He reached out, his fingers brushing against the back of her hand where it rested on the railing. His touch was light, tentative, yet it sent a jolt through her entire body. It was a silent acknowledgement. He understood. The Sadogumi understood, too. They had failed to kill him, so they changed their target. A few days later, a package arrived at the office, addressed specifically to her. Ryota's men scanned and x-rayed it before bringing it up. It was a long, flat box, wrapped in exquisite paper. Inside, nestled on a bed of black silk, was a breathtakingly beautiful kimono of the deepest indigo, embroidered with silver cranes. Tucked into its folds was a single, perfect white lily. Ryota explained its meaning in a low, grim voice. A flower of celebration, and a flower of death. The message was unmistakable. They couldn't get to the dragon, so they would come for the woman he kept by his side. They saw her now. She was no longer invisible. She was his new Akemi, his new weakness. Kaido used the information they'd extracted from the captured assassin to set a trap. It was a bold, almost arrogant move. He requested a face-to-face meeting with the head of the Sadogumi, a man named Hideki Sato, at a neutral location, the private dining room of a Michelin-starred restaurant in Ginza. He was taking the fight to them, on his own terms. "You will come with me," he told Imani. It was not a request. He had a gown delivered for her, a column of deep crimson silk that clung to her curves. It was a statement. He was not hiding her. He was displaying her, a deliberate act of defiance. As she was getting ready, Ryota entered her room and handed her a small, weighted object wrapped in cloth. It was a knife, a tanto, its handle wrapped in black rayskin. "He wants you to have this," Ryota said. "He said you would know what to do with it." A holster was provided, strapping discreetly to her thigh, hidden beneath the silk of the gown. This was her new reality: couture and concealed weapons. The restaurant was an oasis of tranquility, all dark wood and soft lighting. The private room was at the back, overlooking a serene rock garden. Sato was already there, flanked by 2 hulking bodyguards. He was a man who wore his cruelty like a tailored suit, his smile thin and reptilian. "Tanaka," he sneered, his eyes flicking from Kaido's chair to Imani. "I see you've found a replacement. A beautiful one. Does she push you around your lonely apartment?" Kaido's face remained impassive. "We have business to discuss, Sato. Let's not waste time with pleasantries." The air was thick with unspoken violence. Imani stood slightly behind Kaido's chair, his briefcase in her hand, her senses on high alert. The meeting was a farce, a stage for a final confrontation. The negotiations quickly devolved into thinly veiled threats. Outside, she could hear the faint, muffled sounds of a struggle, Kaido's men engaging Sato's. The trap was sprung. Sato's smile vanished. He stood up, knocking his chair over. "You old fool. Did you really think I would walk in here unprepared?" He pulled a short-barreled pistol from his jacket. His bodyguards did the same. "Your reign is over. The Cripple King finally falls." He aimed the gun directly at Kaido's forehead. Time seemed to slow down. In that frozen moment, Imani saw everything with perfect clarity. The smug look on Sato's face, the cold steel of the gun, Kaido's utter lack of fear. He was ready to die. But she was not ready to let him. She did the one thing they would never expect. She let the briefcase fall from her hand. It hit the polished floor with a loud, startling clatter. As all 3 men flinched at the sound, their eyes drawn downward for a fraction of a second, she moved. She didn't reach for her hidden knife to attack. She lunged for the wall beside the door, her hand slapping the master light switch panel. The room was plunged into absolute, suffocating darkness. A moment of stunned silence, and then chaos. A gun fired, the flash a brief, blinding strobe. A man grunted in pain. Imani dropped to the floor, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. In the pitch black, she felt a hand grab her arm. It was strong, certain. Kaido. He pulled her down behind the heavy, overturned dining table, his body shielding hers even in his chair. Another shot echoed in the small room, this one from a different direction, closer. It was Kaido's gun, one she now realized must have been holstered to the frame of his chair. In the dark, with death flying through the air, he pressed his lips close to her ear, his breath warm against her skin. "Imani," he whispered, his voice a low, rough rumble. And then, two words that were more potent than any declaration of love. "My fortress." It was the highest praise a king could offer. Not that she was his beauty, his treasure, or his heart, but that she was his strength, his defense. The fight was over in seconds. When Ryota burst in and flooded the room with light, Sato and his men were down. Kaido was alive, a thin line of blood trickling from a graze on his arm caused by a ricochet. He ignored it completely. His eyes found Imani's, and in that look, a new covenant was forged in silence and violence. The cost of their victory was high. Ryota had taken a bullet to the shoulder protecting their retreat. The pristine restaurant was a scene of carnage. The illusion of a civilized world had been stripped away, leaving only the brutal reality beneath. Back in the penthouse, the silence returned, heavier than ever before. The adrenaline faded, leaving a hollow ache in its place. The city lights glittered outside the scarred window, indifferent. Kaido sat in his chair in the center of the room, watching her. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The question hung between them unspoken. The threat was gone. She was free. She could walk out the door, and no one would stop her. Imani walked to the window, the crimson silk of her gown whispering against the floor. She looked down at the sprawling metropolis, a world she could rejoin at any moment. She could go back to being a normal person with a normal life. A life without gunfights in restaurants, without assassins' bullets, without the constant, terrifying weight of this man's empire. She thought about his hand finding hers in the dark. "My fortress." Slowly, she turned back to face him. His dark eyes followed her every move. She walked not to the door, but to the sleek, modern bar against the far wall. Her hands were perfectly steady as she took down a bottle of Japanese whiskey and 2 crystal glasses. She poured 2 fingers in each, the amber liquid catching the light. She walked across the vast room and placed 1 glass on the small table beside his wheelchair. Then she sat in the armchair opposite him, her own glass held loosely in her hand. She met his gaze and held it, her silence a clear and final answer. She wasn't leaving. She was staying. This was her choice, made not in fear or under duress, but with the full knowledge of what it meant. It wasn't about love, not in the simple way the world understood it. It was about allegiance. It was about the recognition of something in him that mirrored something in herself. In the eye of the storm, beside the silent, broken king who ruled it, she had found her place. She was no longer just his assistant. She was a pillar in his empire, as permanent and unyielding as the steel and marble fortress they called home.